All right. Last week, we started into denial, and we talked about denial in terms of the emotional self and left you with things to think about in which ways you may deny yourself emotional comfort, in what ways may you be denying emotional comfort to others as well. And so the question comes up, so those are some of the questions you need to ask yourself. Okay, I'm a little disorganized here. So this evening we'll start off with the physical self. And the couple of things I wrote down here were, in what ways do you deny yourself physical pleasure? And there's so many different ways to take that. I realized in hindsight in reading it earlier. And the way that I'm looking at it from one point of view, and yes, it could be in terms of intimacy, because that is an important aspect of a relationship and communication. So there is that. But additionally, other ways to look at it is like maybe you like camping, but you come up with reasons not to go camping. Maybe you want to do horseback riding. Physical things that you may enjoy or think you would enjoy doing, and yet you prevent yourself from enjoying them because it's fitting into that whole concept of you don't deserve it, you shouldn't have it, therefore you deny yourself the pleasures of it, whatever it may be. And this is something you really need to look at and ponder. It may very well be that you deny yourself physical exercise, and the mind will give you a good, rational, logical reason as to why you shouldn't do physical exercise, or why you can't take care of yourself. And what I mean by that, because another question I had down here was about physical health. And there are some people who do deny themselves their physical health. One, because it's in keeping, being ill or being out of shape is actually in keeping with expectations about who they are. They may come from very heavy-set parents, and so they don't want to be thin because that would upset the parents. So they're going to be healthy, or not healthy. They're going to be heavy, retain weight. I see that actually I have some family members that are like that. Their parents were heavy, now they're heavy. So denial works in very strange ways. And it's a very subtle kind of a pattern of behavior, because it's not something that's so manifesting like disappointment or dissatisfaction, because those and you can experience them emotionally and be really clear that you're into one of those patterns. Denial is much more subtle, and therefore on some levels a little bit more dangerous, because you don't know that you're doing it, and because of that it can operate freely. So when it comes to the physical self, especially in terms of intimacy and communications, examine whether or not there is that energy that's going on, either from you denying not only yourself, but denying your partner, or your partner denying you. Because patterns work both ways on some levels. I think I've said this before. It's kind of like setups where you would set up a situation to be denied. So it's not like you're exactly denying yourself out of your own volition. However, you're being denied because of something you set in motion in order to achieve that denial, or to achieve being denied. And prime examples are with the material self. I wrote down a bunch of questions, like, in what ways do you deny yourself material rewards for jobs well done? And there are people who will do a great job, and if the company is going to give them a reward of some sort, so no, I don't deserve it, or so-and-so did the job, I just really kind of added a little bit, I really didn't do the bulk of the work, so I really don't get any of the accolades. which are some of the ways in which one would deny themselves that recognition. Because, and the reason it's part of the material self, although that example, the recognition could also be tied into the emotional self, but normally when you do a good job, you would hope that there would be, maybe a bonus or some kind of perk that would come your way in terms of, well, hey, why don't you take the Saturday off, or why don't you take Monday off, have a long weekend? It really just depends on who you work for and what the corporate structure or the independent structure might be. Another way you might deny yourself pleasure is that you may get something new and immediately stain it, rip it, break it, lose it. And those are all aspects of the pattern of denial. You wouldn't normally think about it from that point of view, but the reality is that you did end up denying yourself the pleasure of whatever it is that piece of whatever it was could have given you. Another way that, in keeping with that same thing, is like if you get an iPhone and you immediately lose it, so now you've denied yourself the ability to communicate, the ability to learn, because you can use the iPhone to go on to the internet, research information about whatever it is you want, so which could help participate in your earning capabilities. So once again, you've denied yourself a material forward movement. Then the question comes up, did you replace it? And did you replace it at the same value? And again, this doesn't necessarily have to be about the iPhone. It could be about anything. A new car, you wreck the car. So they give you X amount of dollars for the insurance. That of course, they're not going to give you what the car's worth or even what you owe on it. So you may not even be able to go out and get a newer car, but you have to go back and get an older car. Then another aspect of the pattern comes into, in what ways do you deny others? Which went back a minute ago to the intimacy thing, but from a material point of view, do you hold back from the kids? Do you hold back from your partner? You're holding back from yourself is one issue, holding back from others is another. And again, on the material level, which also applies to the emotional self as well, obviously. And then part of this that needs to be understood, especially when it comes to the material self and the emotional self, well, you know what? And the physical self, because the question comes up, what are the consequences of this particular pattern when it's at work? And so this is something that is very subtle, but it has lasting effects. So if you have a tendency to lose things, break things, rip things, stain things that are brand new, whatever the case may be, you can understand that you're coming from a place of denial. If one of the kids is into this, and children sometimes get into it, and we dismiss it as saying, well, they're learning dexterity, they may be clumsy, but the reality is, from a different point of view, they may be into a pattern of denial. This is why it's so vital to have eyes that see and ears that hear, so that you can catch these things not only in yourself, but in your family members, especially if you're a parent and you've got younger kids, that you can catch it at an early stage, so you can begin to help them understand what it is that they're going through and why are they going through that. When it comes to your social self, the first thing that comes up, do you deny yourself a social life? I have friends that are out every Friday, Saturday, Sunday night with people. And when I tell them that I don't, we have one couple we are friends with that we do things with on occasion. And from their point of view, I'm denying myself a social life. And yet, I don't feel that way because, it's just, I guess it's a matter of placing value on certain things. What's more important, especially in that free time that you can have time to quote unquote socialize, you have to make value judgments as to what's more important about how you spend your time. Either you spend quality time or you just, I don't know what kind of time to call it other than quality time. So at any rate, um, do you deny yourself a social life? And if so, why? Now, it may very well be that you don't have a social life because people don't invite you over anymore because you may have created a particular habit that turns people off. You may talk nonstop. You may take over conversations. You may do things that attack other people. And so that is kind of a setup and kind of works against you, obviously, because you end up being denied the opportunity to mix with others because you're no longer invited. I can go back to when we became vegetarians. Our family stopped inviting us over for meals because their excuse was, we don't know what to feed you. And so because everybody else was carnivores, they felt, I guess, uncomfortable that our diet was what it was. So it was easier for them to not invite us over. And maybe, now that I think about that from a different point of view, that maybe that was us setting ourselves up to be denied that type of a social life. And nonetheless, regardless of the type, and I emphasize that, it still may be an element of denial, though I don't really think that that's part of our patterns from a family point of view for my wife and I. And the last thing is whether or not you deny your partner a social life in the sense that, well, I really don't like those people. I don't want to go out with those people. No, all they ever want to do is talk politics or talk sports. We don't do that, so you may end up having a logical, rational, justifiable reason for not wanting to socialize with other people. And what you end up doing is denying your partner their ability to express themselves in a social situation. And the same thing for the children. You may not like who they want to go play with, who they want to hang with, what they want to do, and so you say no to them. Saying no to anybody, well, obviously there has to be elements of values placed on certain things. So before one says no, one needs to really be clear as to what's going on and where you're coming from, whether or not you're coming from a pattern of denial, a pattern of selfishness, a pattern of perfectionism, whatever the case may be. Here, we're going to look at denial in the spiritual self. So the questions I wrote down here are, in what ways do you think you have denied your spiritual growth? In what ways do you think you have denied your partner or your children's spiritual growth? And in what ways do you deny yourself spiritual growth with the belief that you are being religious? Because spirituality and being religious are not necessarily the same. Religion is more of a dogma and with particular practices and procedures and rules to follow, so to speak. And of course, in terms of being a spiritual being, there's also rules to follow. You got to be thoughtful, you got to be kind, you have to have empathy, you have to have compassion, you have to have love, you have to have acceptance, not only of others, but all of that also has to apply to self. So in the first instance, do you think, and if you have never given it any thought, now is the time, this is one of the things you could work on in your writing down thoughts. have you denied your spiritual growth? Have you become so indoctrinated in the religion that you grew up in that that has, on some levels, hindered your spiritual growth? So then, okay, that takes me to another point, and that is, what do you consider to be spiritual growth? And that's something you need to ask yourself. From one point of view, I would offer this as a thought or an insight or a perspective, probably more of a perspective. When I think in terms of spiritual growth, I don't necessarily think in terms of being more religious, doing, prayers at every meal, that kind of stuff, and giving thanks. Although I do think that giving thanks is essential, but it's also knowing that you are a part of God, and therefore you can handle whatever is coming up in your life. Because as a part of God, that's the spiritual part of you. So the growth would be growing not only more in harmony with the God force, but manifesting more of that understanding, more of that compassion, more of that control, more of that fairness in everything you do. That, I think, would be an example of what true spiritual growth would be about. Manifesting those ideals in everything and looking at things not through a genderized perspective of your maleness or your femaleness, but looking at things from a neutral point of view without those concepts shading your perception. And the same thing goes for your partner and your children. Have you gone down a particular path and not introduced your kids to a religion in hopes that they themselves would come to some spiritual understanding on their own? Or have you forced them into a religion, which is the norm? And it's not a matter of forcing, that's not a good word. But the norm is you take your children with you to church or synagogue or temple or whatever it is that a family does, from generation to generation. So if you grew up in that kind of a house, you're more inclined to kind of do it, unless, of course, you've broken away from that and have gone down a more independent spiritual path as opposed to a religious path. But in terms of pushing the children into a religion, does that deny them the opportunity for true spiritual growth? Something to ponder. These are things to understand. All patterns of behavior are subtle for the simple reason that the emotional self creates them in order to validate the concept. And as the example I gave at some point, the ego, the emotional self, is like water in a sieve, so that no matter how much you understand and can plug up as many holes as you possibly can, the emotional self will always seek to find an opening. In fact, I just realized there's a universal teaching about that. And I don't remember where it is in the Bible, but it's when Jesus talks about, if you knew when the robbers would come, you would gird up your loins, you would protect yourself. And we never know when a pattern is triggered. So we don't know when it's going to show up. However, when you have developed your eyes to see, your ears to hear, then at that point, you may be able to, in seeing and hearing, immediately identify which pattern has the potential to manifest. Whether or not it does or doesn't will depend upon the amount of introspection you do the moment you see something like that, so that you begin to inquire internally, what did I just see? How is that going to stimulate me? What pattern is that going to set in motion? What did I hear? What did they say to me? Did they attack me? How did they attack me? What is that going to make me do? How am I going to respond to that? Now, obviously, that kind of awareness is an expanded level of consciousness that we're moving towards. Right now, we're in the midst of patterns. And so what we want to do is be able to have symbols that we can identify that tell us not only what pattern is at work, but where in the pattern we are. And since we're talking about denial, I gave you some of the examples about breaking, losing, tearing, ripping, staining something new. Now, obviously, you may be able to catch the emotional one, you may be able to see the physical one, but the material ones, in my mind, are always those symbols that manifest because you missed the others. Remember, your mind is always talking to you. It's always giving you guidance. It's always giving you symbols. Doesn't mean we always understand them or that we even acknowledge them, that we see them. But when you do, you need to question, because if you don't, ultimately everything will manifest physically. This is in keeping with the other universal teaching of what is within will manifest without. Another teaching along the same lines is, well, two of them came to mind. One, know what's before your eyes and all the mysteries are revealed. Because whatever you're looking at is a reflection of your co-creation of your reality. And the other one was, nothing ever remains hidden. Everything shall be made manifest. Now, it may very well be that you want things, you're doing something in secret and you may feel guilty about it. And so you will create a situation that it will become known. That's just the way the mind works. It's just the way the teachings work, because the teachings are based on spiritual law, period. And so that's why the more you can understand about the universal teachings and the more that you can see them at work in your life, then the stronger your consciousness becomes, and the more attuned you are and the more aware you are, not only of what's going on around you, but what you're going through internally. Okay. Needed some water. Okay, next pattern up, and this is a doozy. This one has a lot of ramifications, and it's the pattern of sacrifice. And I think sacrifice is one of those things that is very religion oriented. And sacrifice is something people get into and end up, I think out of all of the patterns, this one may contribute more to diseases than anything. And I'll explain as we go on. So in the emotional self, and this is where the disease will manifest from this point of view, people who are into the concept of sacrifice are willing to do and give of themselves to anybody and everybody. All anybody has to do is ask about this, that, or the other. Oh yeah, sure, I can do that. Yeah, I'll go get you. Yeah, I'll pick that up for you. Yeah, well, let me do this for you, or let me do that for you. And moms are like that. Moms are caretakers, and sometimes the dads are the caretakers. And they're the ones who go overboard to do for their partner. Mom does it for dad and the kids, and dad does it for mom and the kids. And you may do it at work, because if you're dealing with the pattern of sacrifice, it's going to manifest in every aspect of your life. The catch-22 is, and this is where the diseases begin, because if you're always helping others, always giving to others, well, you only have so much that you can continually give so much energy, so much emotion that you can continually give without it being replaced. It needs to be replaced. Now, of course, we go to sleep, we think we energize ourselves, but on an emotional level, you need that input from the external on some levels, especially when you're dealing with this kind of a pattern. Otherwise, you'd be doing everything from another universal teaching, which is be a passerby, which means don't get involved emotionally. However, we're talking about sacrifice. So if you don't get anything in return, if you're not being nurtured and you're constantly giving out, giving out, giving out, well, guess what? At some point, you're going to get angry. You're going to resent it. That you're doing for everybody, no one does for you. And if you've ever heard me talk about cancer, and I think I probably have in some of our sessions, those two emotions, actually there's 4 emotions that cause cancer: anger, frustration, resentment, and guilt. And we'll go there, I'll start at the end. You could feel guilty for not sacrificing for others because that's part of the religious indoctrination. You're supposed to give, 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 expecting nothing in return. And that's what it is. It's an expectation, but the reality is, the truth is, you need to be fed. You can't constantly be feeding and giving without getting that in return. So you can end up feeling guilty, and then you get angry at yourself for feeling guilty. Resentment, is another thing that can lead to anger as well as frustration. So if sacrifice is a pattern you are dealing with, you need to identify it as quickly as you possibly can. You need to get it under control. You need to, if you're in a relationship, if it's between you and your husband, if one of you is into sacrifice, you need to discuss it. If you're working with employees and you really like them and you don't want to lose them, or your boss, you need to discuss it. And if you're working for somebody and they're constantly demanding, because if you're into sacrifice, you make yourself available. You put out that energy of yes, you can take advantage of me. So at some point, you're going to have to pull that energy in and begin to say no, and then just be prepared to deal with whatever the consequences are, so that, because sometimes when you cut people off from something they expect from you all the time, and you begin to say no, it changes the nature of the relationship. So you need to question that. And the next section was, sacrifice. How does this work in your physical self? When you deplete yourself emotionally, at the same time, you are depleting yourself physically. So I think we talked about the pattern of depletion, and I don't know that I interwove sacrifice with it, but as you can see, they are interbound. This is one of the reasons why it's so vital to understand your patterns. And of course, you may find as we go through 30 patterns that you can relate to 10 of them or 20 of them or 5 of them, And whatever the patterns are that you can relate to it, and maybe there should be a special page for that, titled patterns I can relate to, patterns that, I'm indulging in, and then prioritize them so that you know which one is the most detrimental to your well-being. And that's the one you work on first and foremost, seeking to understand what stimulates the pattern, what is the concept behind the pattern, so that you can get it under control and create symbols that tell you when that pattern's at work so that you can become truly conscious of it and catch yourself before you say, oh yeah, I can do that. Okay? Because it will lead to physical depletion. Not only will it lead to physical depletion, and there may be another point to that. And because again, I think that sometimes patterns work two ways. You may, because you're willing to sacrifice, you may also have an expectation that maybe your partner should sacrifice, your children should sacrifice for you or for others. You know, this goes back to, I believe it's in Exodus, where it says something to the effect of the inequities of the father are passed on to the children and the children's children unto the third and fourth generation. What this means is, and here's a perfect example, if you are into sacrifice, let's go there first. If you are into sacrifice, you may have learned it from one of your parents, who may have learned it from one of their parents, or it may have been that, you know, one of the parents got deep into their religious beliefs, and that part of that thing that the minister or that particular church or that particular sect said that sacrifice was a beautiful thing and that you should be willing to sacrifice your life in service to others. Well, it is on some levels a beautiful thought. However, the reality is all the resentment that can come about through not being nurtured back into helping you maintain a healthy balance. So if mom got into that or dad got into that, well, then guess what? You got into it. And assuming that your, you know, modality is approval seeking acceptance as opposed to rejection seeking acceptance, then what are the kids into? Because we are living examples of our patterns. This is what we're teaching our children. Remember, the inequities unto the children's children. So if you see that this is a big pattern in your life, you need to get it under control, as you do every other pattern, for the children's sake and for your unity's sake, and obviously above all for your own personal health. Because one of the things that sacrifice will do, certainly, okay, we go through the emotions, we're wiped out, we are emotionally drained. Now our immune system is down, okay? So physically, we're becoming debilitated. We're not as vital as we were because we're emotionally drained. You cannot separate them. Now it's affecting our material self, because if we get sick, we've got to pay money out of pocket, because there's always a copay, assuming you have insurance. There is something along that line where you have to take care of self. Another way that sacrifice works in the material self is you've got, you know, a grown child that is constantly hitting you up for money because they can't manage their money. You may have, your parents may need money, you know, your brother, your sister, one of your nieces, your nephews, a buddy, a friend may need money. And of course, you're always willing to give because on some levels you have. And yet, even when you don't have extra resources, you still may give because you may feel guilty not helping. And on some levels, you may never see that money again, which could end up creating resentment. You know, hey, I lent you $5,000. Where's the money? Well, yeah, I know, but you know, you make some kind of an adjustment, some kind of, you know, send me $100 once a year or something. Make some kind of a statement that you acknowledge what I did for you. So you can begin to see how the mind can work and the different attitudes that you can begin to develop, which, and of course, you know, developing an attitude of resentment can take you down a long road. And there's that other teaching where the 99 sheep, the one goes astray and he goes after the one sheep, because that one sheep can lead the other 99 astray. That one negative thought that you have about the person you gave money to, or the person that caused you to become ill, you may end up being resentful. And then you start thinking in about, well, you know, they did this and they did that, and they didn't do this and they didn't do that. And look how they squander the money. Look at what they did with what I gave them to help them. And they don't even want to seem to help themselves. So you can begin to see how the mind can take you on a journey that you don't really want to go on. You don't have any choice, because you're part of now that one sheep has taken all those other 99 thoughts down that path. You've got to be mindful. There needs to be extra effort in getting those kinds of thoughts under control. And again, from the social self, which is kind of like the emotional self, that you're doing everything for others, and you also end up with no time for yourself. Now, there's a question there, because it may very well be that you don't want to take time for yourself. And that ties back into denial from a different point of view. We need to take time for ourselves. We need to have alone time. We need to have creative time. We need to have thinking time. We need to have introspection time. And yet, a lot of people will avoid that. They'll fill themselves up with all kinds of activities in order to do, and since we're talking about sacrifice, it's doing everything for everybody else. Oh yeah, I'll come over early, I'll help set up, I'll help this, I'll help that, oh, I'll do this, I'll make that. When in reality, maybe it's not even being asked of you, so you're volunteering that. Is it tying into sacrifice? Good question. Need to understand how this particular pattern, because of its potential for being a major detriment to your growth, how it's at work in your life. And does it deny you the time that you need to go within? Remember, last session or session 2 ago, I told you at least take 15 minutes, 2-3 times a week, to go over your notes, to really think and ponder about particular patterns, the success-failure patterns, disappointment, the dissatisfaction. You need to become aware of these things, especially if you're a parent, so that you do not teach them to the child. As a boss, so you do not manifest them at work with your employees or towards your management staff, or whatever the case may be. You really need to see how that particular pattern works in your life, so that you can get it together, so that you can grow your true self, your true spiritual self. And there is a purpose to all of this. We teach by example. We are all living lights of the God force. There's a teaching, you don't take a candle and you take it to the roof and you don't stick it under a bushel basket, but you put it out there for all to see, to help light the way. It begins with the self. And the more that you can understand yourself, the more power you will have, and the more peace and tranquility you will experience internally. So, sacrificing the spiritual self, I wrote down, do you give and do for the church and people without taking care of yourself? So as you can see, this is one particular pattern that is the same, woven through all 4 selves. I guess you could say on another level, all patterns are woven through the same 4 selves. But this one seems to have more of a central theme, if you will, and that is sacrificing. Whereas it's much more dominant and much easier to see than some of the other patterns. that are more subtle and manifest differently. But this is, to me, the success, failure, doubt and fear, sacrifice are major patterns that need to be seen and dealt with. This next pattern, in fact, I think I'm going to save this. I think that I've given you enough to work with over the next couple of weeks. We will get together again on the 10th of December. I will put it in the email and let you all know. And at that time, we'll get into the concept of self-destruction. So start thinking not only about what we've covered, and really try to discipline yourself. Become a disciple unto yourself. It's vital for your growth, for your health, for your life, for your family, for the people you work with, the people you love, the people you mix with socially. Try to get a handle on your patterns. And I know that you will see them much easier in others, because it's just the way it is. It's so much easier to see everything in everybody else, and it's harder to see things in ourselves. But also weave into your thinking, and we'll go deeper into the concept of self-destruction when we get back together again. But think about how you might be indulging. I don't know, indulging is not the right word, but how it is you think that self-destructive tendencies may be at work in your life, in your relationship with self and others. So I'm going to conclude on that, unless anybody has any questions about anything we have covered. And if not, then you can always write to me and we can chat about them and we'll go from there. So until we get back together again, everybody hopefully will have a fabulous Thanksgiving with your family, your loved ones, and you'll enjoy whatever the meal is. Fabulous Thanksgiving with your families. Take care and be well.